Welcome to the Modern Hippie podcast, where we'll be exploring all of my favorite boundary-pushing people and topics surrounding consciousness, psychedelics, mental performance, functional medicine, living in alignment, and so much more. I'm your host, Barrett Perlman, a former pro wakeboarder turned body worker, energy healer, and well, a modern hippie. And I'm so glad you're here. I am here with Scott James, who is a dear friend of mine, who we've met through some interesting means. But thank you for being my first guest on the Modern Hippie podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
Yeah, this is so exciting for me. People keep asking me if I'm a modern hippie, and I don't quite know how to answer, but I guess so.
I think you're answering now. Yes, you are a modern hippie. It's official.
So to just jump straight into some hippie things. One of the things I love about hanging out with you is that you are one of the first people I've ever met who is also a psychonaut. And for our listeners who don't know what a psychonaut is, how would you describe a psychonaut?
I don't know. I've never called myself a psychonaut, but I will say that actually the first time I remember hearing that term was in Amsterdam, and they have these magic truffles, which are the same thing as mushrooms, basically, like outlawed mushrooms in like 2007. And by technicality, they can grow the same thing underground, which are truffles. And the first time I went there, they have these smart shops, and they have these posters that tell you about the different kinds of truffles. And was one, they have different star ratings, like, body. So these are psychedelic, if we pick up on that, psychedelic truffles. And different star ratings that say like body high, stars 1 through 5, and, so on and so forth. There's one that was all 5 stars that said advanced psychonauts only. Ooh. And it was like, I had like 2 nights in Amsterdam, so I'm like, give me that one. So like, ate almost all of that, and I had the Psychonaut experience there. But I would say just in general, I'm fascinated by the world of psychedelics, and just kind of understanding how the deep mysteries of the universe. I'm just a restless person, and like anything that can expand my mind into new territory and help provide answers. I'm into it. I'm interested.
Well said.
Yeah.
And for me, the term psychonaut, as I've heard it described, is like someone who uses psychedelics to explore consciousness and what that means. And I'd never really met anyone besides myself that I knew until I met you, who was kind of doing the same things as me. So that was really fascinating, because it was like I was taking these big doses of mushrooms and going to places and experiencing things that like no one else I knew could really relate to. You could find some YouTube videos and on the topics and whatnot, but I think that was what really started to bring you and I together as friends.
Yeah, it's hard to talk to most people about, like, most people who will take mushrooms would take like a recreational dose, and they'll, and don't get me wrong, like I think it's fun to do at concerts and things like that too, but like it's a very different thing to like really go like, so like Terence McKenna would suggest like a 5-gram dose alone in darkness and just in with your own mind. Mm-hmm. And there are some fascinating places to go to in that realm that are so far beyond just like taking something to enhance an experience. It's like, I don't know. I've been to some fascinating places, like where it feels like you're like playing with the code to the Matrix, like.
Right.
Yeah,
I love that point where you tap in and you start seeing the symbols and the images and the thing. You're like, is anybody else seeing this? And unless everyone's taken what you've taken, they're not seeing it. But the ironic thing is that everyone else who has taken what you've taken has seen the same things, relatively similar things. There's a lot of repeating patterns with people's stories. And I mean, you mentioned Terence McKenna, like he's one of the godfathers of psilocybin research and psilocybin exploration. I've had the pleasure of meeting his brother, Dennis McKenna, who's an ethnopharmacologist, which ethnopharmacology is the study of plant medicines and their use in tribes, but also their applications to the rest of society. And just what a pleasure, what a joy that people study this for a living.
Yeah, I'd get paid to do it. Yeah, I'm still waiting for my paycheck to come in.
One of these days, maybe with this podcast.
Yeah, I mean, there are times when for me, it's not, more often than not, it's not a social experience. I mean, it certainly could be, definitely. I know that you've done it in ceremony, and that you do it, I think, fairly regularly in ceremony. And I've certainly had that experience with ayahuasca. Mushrooms I usually do by myself, so I don't have the question of whether anyone else is seeing it. Definitely not. It seems, it's kind of, I feel that what you see is just a reflection of what's in your own mind, and it gets into some interesting realms. You can see interesting things reflected back at you if you kind of get that sort of reflexive perspective on what it shows you.
Yeah, and I think sometimes my friends remind me that like not everyone sees what I see, and I have a really hard time believing that because I see the same thing every time. There's all this sacred geometry, and if you guys aren't familiar with sacred geometry, it's like all these symbols that basically make up everything in creation. Really basic stuff like circles, triangles. I think something called the seed of life is like 16 or so circles overlaid over each other. And when you start to look at science and nature, you can identify these patterns through everything. And so for me, that's what emerges. And I don't really feel like I did that much work on myself to get to that point of like, really when psilocybin really kicks in, that stuff emerges. Do you see those same patterns?
I'm not sure. I would say that, like, at a certain point, the visuals that I see, particularly like with my eyes closed, are just pretty outrageous. Like, it's not anything I would call geometric. It's more like, I mean, I can't possibly come up with words to describe some of the things that I've seen. But I've definitely, I've been transported to some very far out there worlds. Yeah, it's like it's so hard to come up with language to describe. I'm not a very visual person anyway, so like if you were to, at any random time tell me to close my eyes, even in a familiar place, and like describe anything in the room, I'd be horrible at it. Like, I'm a very kinesthetic and auditory person, so like I just have these sort of like impressions in my memory. But I've certainly seen. I mean, I've there have been times when I've had things weighing on my mind, and I noticed that I will see a sort of reflection of that. And there's been times when I've been really in a spiritually stuck place, and I will perceive these sort of dense kind of like sort of like interference, kind of this like, dark kind of tangled sort of energy web, and like, and through kind of sitting with it and coming to like, I was like interacting with it and coming to understand how it's a reflection of my shadow. Like, and I've been able to sort of like dissipate it and then like get to another level. You know, that's happened with me on mushrooms and also on DMT. So that's been a very interesting experience, just to have that reflected like right back out. That tells me like, okay, like I need to like clear some energy out, and you know, you can work through it in the course of the psychedelic experience, and then you know also sometimes you know or you know, generally speaking, you know, just that it's time to like get rid of some stuff. You know, I do like fire ceremonies at the beach sometimes, you know, so cool. Stuff that's like energy I want to get rid of, burn it.
Yeah. It's interesting to hear you say this now, because you've told me the story about encountering these shadow energies before. And a problem I have on high doses of psilocybin, or more so on DMT. And so DMT is kind of like a shortcut straight to the primo psilocybin space. It's like a hefty dose of what you see on psilocybin for like 15 minutes. Kind of taps you into that. They call it the spirit molecule. So like that really tapped in universal space. And for me, I had this problem with, for some reason, seeing these like clown figures. And I'm not a clown person. I'm not scared of clowns. I have like no feelings towards clowns. I don't
know too many people who describe themselves as clown people.
Yeah, and they turned into like these clowns living in this mechanical space, which I think was also triggered by the awful taste of DMT. When you smoke it, it's very chemically. But that started crossing over into some of my heavier psilocybin doses. Yeah. Where I would start.
It's definitely very related universes in my world, from my experience.
Yeah. And I noticed, just like you described, with having to clear the energy and get into a different energetic place, that when that happens to me, it's because my energy is not at the right frequency. And when I can then sit with it, and sometimes it's like there's a song playing and I've decided that's not the song that I want right now, and I'm fighting it, where I'm like, I want to be peaceful, and this song's inspiring me to dance, you know? Yeah. And so when I begin to lean into the elements of my setting, then that's when those clowns kind of clear. Almost, you know, we don't use the term bad trip anymore. Now they call it a challenging trip, because, you know, they're sort of starting to say a challenging trip is really just something you haven't leaned into. You know, you're fighting what's happening. You're fighting what's coming up. You're not embracing it and looking at it. And so for me, once I start to embrace that, then those negative aspects really dissipate, and I get let much more into the plant medicine.
Yeah. I think that's something that I've learned is how you can interpret virtually any psychedelic experience positively, and that's kind of the trick, unless it has negative consequences in the real world. Obviously you want to, you know, it's about setting the container so that you're able to have your experience without, you know, doing anything stupid that has consequences later. But in the context of the psychedelic experience, even things that may seem horrifying, I think correctly interpreted, or most, you know, usefully interpreted, are ultimately positive. But yeah, the way that you you know, it's like Sun Tzu in the Art of War, you know, like the battle's won or lost before it's begun. And like entering a trip, I've learned so much about setting the right container, taking care of all of the fundamentals before you embark on the journey. And what you're saying before reminded me of a funny time when I went on this was last summer, went on a trip with some friends, and we went to this, it was a bartender convention thing, and they got me into it. I was the only one there who wasn't a bartender. And,
oh gosh.
And it was like this, like, it was very much kind of, the experience was colored by the pandemic. It was like, there was like a silent disco, which was just like weird in the context of something we're supposed to meet people at like a networking event. The whole thing was just like it was just shit. And like on the way back, we wanted to do something that was different because like all of us had been like stressed and you know, my friends had been way overworked, and it was like, let's get into nature. So we decided, we just so happened to have some mushrooms on us, and we decided to hit up this lake on the way back from, because we're in Palm Springs, and we hit this place called Lake Paris. And none of us had ever heard of it before, but it was like, okay, cool, why not? Let's give it a go. So we went there, and it's this sort of like reservoir. I think it was a really interesting landscape, and it was really cool, but like we didn't know which way was up, and we just got there, and we just kind of ate some mushrooms before we decided where we were gonna like be situated or what the hell we were gonna do. And so we're kind of driving around, and like my friends are like bickering about like, well, you know, why don't we just go back to the place that we were in the beginning, because that was perfectly fine. And then like, no, I think we should just go like keep looking, and like at some point I was like, this was a mistake. I was like, the mushrooms are kicking in. I'm like, fuck. I'm like, this is you know. So at that point it was just like his sense of humor just kicked in. I was just like, all right, this is gonna suck, and the other way it's gonna not suck is just to make it funny. And eventually we ended up at the, you know, where we started, and it felt like a game of like, there weren't that many people there, but this was like Inland Empire, so like, you know, I at least imagined, you know, this is a pretty square kind of crowd, and we're like these three weirdos from LA like tripping on mushrooms. It was like, where's Waldo, like spot the three, you know, clowns on mushrooms. And like I felt like we were just standing out like a sore thumb, and we just like sat on the grass and like tried to get situated, and the portable stereo thing, Bluetooth, died, so all we had was the phone, and then like we put it in my friend's boot, but like there was no reception, so all we got were the songs that I downloaded onto my phone. So we just we put it on random, and I called it God's playlist. So it was like, whatever song comes up, that's the song that God intended for us to hear in that moment, and it's up to our minds to make that the right song.
Yeah.
And it turns out God really likes Bruce Springsteen, for one thing.
Who doesn't like this?
And like, you know, the funny stuff was coming up, like we're all trying to figure out our way, like, because there was just so much happening, and like there was, you know, some tension between my friends, and we're all trying to figure out how to navigate this trip. And then like, you know, his funny songs coming on, like turn around, and we're just like, what the fuck are we doing?
Every now and then.
But then there was this moment where like we just decided, how about we just shut the music off and we just listen to like the sounds of nature. And that, boom, like as soon as we made that decision, as soon as we did that, it became fucking dope. It was like, it was a transcendent experience, because like we were just, and all of us had been starved for nature for a while. Like we hadn't been able to like be, like I was craving it so much, and like all of a sudden we're feeling the breeze, and this beautiful tree, and then we've got the, you know, the moon behind the tree, and then the, you know, the reflection coming off the lake, and like, and just all these sounds, and like all three of us just synchronized on this fantastic experience, and the rest of it was just transcendent. It was just dope. Like we just like, you know, there's grass, and then there was sand, and then there was a lake, and just to have our like toes in the sand, and like it was just amazing after that. But like it was, yeah, it took a little bit of like mental jujitsu or whatever to like to navigate the weirdness in the beginning, and then take it to a place where there was no resistance and it was all just good.
Yeah, I feel like nature is so good for that. Psilocybin specifically in nature is like somewhat groundbreaking, you know, all of that sacred geometry I was talking about, you almost see emerging in in the plants, and you feel it in the breeze. And you could argue that your senses are more open, they're more aware, they're more heightened, but scientifically you actually have more parts of your brain firing than you typically do. So parts that are normally firing like when you're asleep are actually on during that time, and parts that don't usually fire together begin firing together. So you're downloading so much more information. And I feel like that's a really crucial part of connecting us back to the planet, connecting us back to consciousness, to what it's all about. So like when you find yourself in an improper setting, you can have these wonky trips where things just go wrong, everything goes astray. Like it's almost like literally because you're on mushrooms, everything's not going your way or the weirdest shit is happening.
Yeah, I think setting the container is such an important part of any kind of a journey where you go outside of the normal kind of way of functioning. Like even like I'll do that sometimes with ketamine, for example. And like you can get to some really powerful places where, I feel a strong ability to manifest and to create to intentionally create a sort of placebo effect. But it's critical to set the container. You don't want to be interrupted in the middle of the stuff. Mm-hmm. Like you need to know that while you're in that space, if you want to have clean focus and really be able to bring out all of the potential power in that kind of an experience, mm-hmm. that you're not going to get interrupted. And certainly if you're doing something with multiple people, you definitely want to know like what the parameters are. And I think like communication in advance is a really good idea. Like, where's everybody at? And actually a friend of mine, Arsini, he's from Moscow, and this is something that he said is just normal in the culture that he grew up in, that I think is just a really great thing to do in general. When he would go out with his friends, it was just regular for them to check in with each other and just like go around the room. How's everybody doing? Who's like, 1 to 10, how we feeling? Like who's the, so like you can kind of sniff it out if someone's like primed to go sideways, something needs to be dealt with before. And, they may not be comfortable or have the wherewithal, whatever, to speak up first, or they're just trying to get to like, just give me something to get me in a different place or whatever. But like the collective intelligence of the group can be like, let's talk about this. What's happening? What's going on? Yeah. How can we support you? And get them, because you want to be in the right frame. You want to be synchronized. Mm-hmm. You want to know that you have the safe parameters, and you want to be, kind of launching from sort of harmonious frequencies. They don't have to be the same place, but you kind of have to have certain things in order to be able to get the most out of it.
I love the idea of checking in with each other. In the meantime, there's a very predominant concept that some of my listeners might not be privy to yet, but it's the concept of set and setting. And as they develop psilocybin for use in therapeutic settings and for healing settings, it's a very important concept. So it addresses both your mindset as you go into it. Where are you at? What are you hoping to get out of it? And then also setting is your actual location and the things around you. And one of the primary focuses of that being, like you're talking about, where it should be a safe space, somewhere you're not going to be interrupted, somewhere, you're not going to have to worry about your safety in the middle of it. Obviously sometimes accidents happen and things come up, but that's the fastest way to turn a journey, as I call them. This
brings to mind a particular time. After said trip to Amsterdam, I found that you can order these magic truffles, allegedly, online.
Oh, no.
magictruffles.com, if I do not condone the use of drugs or any illegal websites. But there is this website that exists called magictruffles.com, and allegedly we ordered some magic truffles from there. And I had the brilliant idea because I was living with my girlfriend at the time in Santa Monica, and I was like, for some reason, I thought it would be a good idea to take some truffles on the beach in the middle of the day near the Santa Monica Pier.
Oh, God.
We were just going to like lay on the... I don't know what the plan was.
Sounds like the most unsafe setting I could think of.
It's just dumb. But I mean, I had an expectation of what it was going to be like, and then I just had this very like that horrible feeling when it's like, oh shit, this is coming out way stronger than I was ready for. Like I just bit off way more than I could chew. And I remember closing my eyes, like lying down, face up to the sun, closing my eyes, and then it was like this crazy Mayan calendar visual thing, and it was like going into like, I don't know, into my brain and like pulling out toxins or would like, I mean, in retrospect, it probably would have been pretty cool if I knew how to handle it and just sat there and like let it do its thing. Right. But it was overwhelming. I was like, what the hell is going? And then as soon as you start to get kind of like panicky, like when you're like at the beach like that in public, it's like, fuck, where do I go? And like, I was like, I need a beer. And like, we were like, I think we can get a beer because we were close to the Santa Monica Pier. I was like, let's just get a beer at the pier. And for whatever reason, it just didn't work out. There were just so many people everywhere. And then we went along the beach. There were these little, sandwich stands and stuff. And I guessed that one of them would sell beer, but none of them did. And it was just like, don't look at me. I'm like, leave me alone. And then we ended up in Venice. And Venice is the worst place to take, like, on the Venice boardwalk, because you end up with 8 conflicting vibrational energy fields where you've got like someone with a boombox and someone playing an autotune guitar, and like it was just madness. Eventually found a bar and like had a few drinks and then like settled in, and like we had fun after that. But
oh my gosh,
don't do that. It's a bad idea.
Yeah. What a challenging time. Like,
but sometimes I'm good at learning things the hard way.
Me too. Before, yeah. The first time I ever took mushrooms, I was, I think, 18 years old, and I was a freshman in college, and I had gone to visit some friends of mine in Mississippi, and I just knew like this core group of friends, and they were like, we're all going to take mushrooms. And my first time was like everything that you would hope to be. Like they put the Wizard of Oz on with the Dark Side of the Moon soundtrack, which if you've never done it is really incredible how much the Wizard of Oz and the Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd really line up. Really incredible. And so it was like images spinning off. It's honestly not a lot like what I experience now, but something that was similar then that I experience now is I felt so compelled and overwhelmed by the music, and I kept trying to go to this back bedroom to lay down by myself because I found being with everyone to be a bit overwhelming. And I just wanted to close my eyes and see what I could see, the music in my head making these incredible patterns every single beat. And they were all so panicked that I was going to have a bad trip that they wouldn't leave me alone. And I was like, I promise you guys, I'm having the best trip. I'll just leave me back here, please. They're like, no, you're going to have a bad trip. You're our responsibility. You have to come out. And I was like a little bummed because I was having this amazing experience alone. And as I don't know that I really did mushrooms much more again up until, so that was around, what year did I go to college? Like 2004. I didn't really start doing mushrooms again until around 2016. And I don't even remember how I came to have these mushrooms. Like, I think I had bought some weed and someone was like, I also got mushrooms. I was like, I haven't done those in a while. And they'd sat around for months. And then I broke up with a boyfriend, and it was really devastating for me. And not just the loss of a boyfriend, but all of these things that I was led to believe about myself felt really depressing for me. And I've struggled with a lot of depression my whole life. And so I remember telling my best friend that tonight was the night I was going to die. But I had these mushrooms first, and I was going to take them. And that it's just, let's see what happens, because people say things happen on mushrooms, and I really hadn't experienced them much.
Were you going to commit suicide?
Yeah.
Okay. And then you were just like, I'm going to take these shrooms first and see what happens.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is clearly the universe looking out or something.
Okay.
I was like, maybe there's hope. Maybe this is my lifeline.
Yeah.
And I took the mushrooms, and I didn't know what to do on them, but the guy who had sold them to me had said, everyone says not to look yourself in the mirror on mushrooms, but I got to tell you, it's the most transformative experience. And I went, okay, I like that. I'm going to do that. And I, was like, I'm going to try to see my aura and stuff. And I had this book on auras, and I was standing in the mirror, and super depressed on the inside. I think I might have also taken a little bit of MDMA with it, but I started relaxing my eyes the way this book described to see your aura, kind of like those 3D image pop-up books, where you relax your eyes and the image comes out of what you're looking at. And I did that, and all of a suddenly I was just looking into this, like, my two eyes converged into one in the middle of my forehead, and I'm staring at it, and all this shit starts happening on the sides. And like, I started getting this knowledge kind of downloaded into me, these inexplicable messages, these inexplicable thoughts that I was now having that had nothing to do with what I was going through. And it was like, you have to love yourself. The love is here. There's love for you. You have to love yourself. I'm going, what the fuck? Let's start with, I don't love myself, really. And then I just heard this: sit down on the ground, look at your dog. My dog, Apollo, you guys will learn about him all through this podcast. He is a great little healer. He is a gem. And he was there with me. And I sit down and I start petting him, and I'm getting just this download of fill with the love you feel for your dog, fill with the love you feel for Apollo. And I started looking at him, and I'm just almost in tears, ready to explode with how much I love my dog. Like, he taught me unconditional love that I could feel towards another being. And then all of a sudden in my head, I hear this, like, and now just use like a mirror and flip that love on yourself. Put that in between you and him and flip it on yourself. And, I'm in this altered state of consciousness. And so I'm like, what? That sounds crazy. Mirror. And boom, like, hits me like just a tidal wave. All of a sudden, my body fills with this, I'm getting goosebumps right now, but fills with this love that I had never experienced for myself. Not me directed at myself. I had been learning meditation some years before, and I had experienced through meditation waves of unconditional love that would bring me to tears every time. But that was the first time that I was like, oh my God, this is what it's like to love from within, to love me from within. And that night, I hail as the night that started my spiritual awakening. Cool. And so for me, having had that experience on mushrooms, and I was elated for months. I mean, psychedelic research now talks about creating these things called mystical experiences for people that are life-changing. And for me, that was my mystical experience that was life-changing. It altered everything about my trajectory since then. And then people started to think I was crazy for doing mushrooms by myself. But I was like, it's 2016. And I'm like, guys, I'm onto something. Like, I'm telling you, I'm having these breakthroughs on mushrooms by myself at home, where I'm crying out the things that I'm carrying that are weighing on me in a way where they're not returning. I'm doing almost like 10 years of psychotherapy in one night sitting. And it's rewarding for me now to hear that that's what they're hailing psilocybin as, almost something that enables people to go in and look at their own internal issues and make major changes and have these experiences and see the world and the light in a different way that alters their trajectory.
Yeah, sometimes these medicines just know what you need and just give it to you. I've had that experience certainly with DMT, where sometimes it just it gives you the biggest hug from the depths of the universe that like nothing else could give you. You think you need sometimes, I mean, like I've been in a place where I felt like I needed something external and I couldn't figure out how to get it, but like it's not actually external. But
Exactly.
when you're coming from a very sincere place, and very much of it depends on where you're coming from. I find that when you kind of, understand the terrain and you understand, you have a little bit of referential experience with psychedelics. When you come at an experience from a very sincere place, you get powerful results. If there's too much ego involved in what you're looking for, it's going to have a way of teaching you a lesson more often than not. But
Sure.
if you're in a very sincere place, and a lot of it has to do with you can't use psychedelics to do the work for you that you need to do in real life. So it's a different psychology. You feel it differently, because I've certainly been guilty of that, and certain DMT will give you very fast feedback, so like if you're if you're not putting in the work and doing the things that you need to do, and you try, like, let me just try some DMT to see if that can make me feel good again, like, in my experience, DMT will give you a really hard fuck you. And it's like, okay, I did something wrong. Hold on, let me, and what I've come to find is that that's really what it comes down to. It's like, it's giving you lessons. Like, if you understand how to interpret these lessons, and I will say that I would definitely recommend seeking out people in spiritual community who have gone before, who can be, really good guides and mentors, especially the deeper that you want to go, because, the stuff can get pretty intense. I think if you integrate the lessons and you do the work and you don't try to over rely on psychedelics for your insights, then you get rewarded. Then it's like, okay, like, and you can kind of gauge how you feel about it going into something. You're like, okay, like, all those things that I'd planned on doing before I embark on this, journey that I've had marked on my calendar, where I'm going to do mushrooms at the beach or whatever the case may be. Like, when you do that and then you go into it, then you have the best experiences. But if you just kind of screw off and like expect the mushrooms to do the work for you, and you feel a little bit guilty about not doing stuff, then it's going to be reflected.
I think that's well said. I did my first heroic dose of mushrooms, which, to my understanding, they consider heroic to be anything like 5 grams and up. Mm-hmm. And so my dumbass is not very skilled with like ounces and grams. Like, I used to always ask like the marijuana dealer, like, can I get an ounce? And he'd be like, I don't think that's what you mean. I was like, the little comes in a little canister. He's like, you mean a gram? I was like, oh yeah, sure.
Very important to get the units of measurement right.
So when I went to Guatemala last year, I did my first heroic dose of mushrooms, and I took like half an ounce of mushrooms with me. And I was like, I don't know, it's like half of, there must be like 20 in a ounce, so half of that's 10, so half of that's 5. So I like took my stash and kind of divided it in half and tried to eat as much as I could. And I mean, it starts kicking in before I'm even done.
So half of a half ounce?
Yeah, which would be a quarter, which is a bit more like 7 grams.
Yeah, because there's a difference between 5 and 7 for sure.
There is. And, I had spent the whole day in ceremony because I'm in Guatemala. I'm in this beautiful location location on this lake. So I spent the day just waking up with the birds and hanging out on the grounds and playing with the dogs and getting my feet on the grass. And I swam in the lake, and I asked the elements and the nature of the lake and the land to support me in this journey, because I was really scared, actually, because not only are psychedelics not allowed at the place I go, or plant medicines, really. So I was like, if something happens, I'm not really supposed to be doing this. But I felt confident enough in the stuff I had done already that I was like, for me, nothing bad happens on mushrooms. So I set it all up and took them, and they started, even kicking in right before I was even done. I had to kind of stop eating as much as I was. I was like, what have I done? And had to this day, the most beautiful experience I have ever had on mushrooms by taking what I now realize was a bit more like 7 grams.
Yeah, for those listening at home, measure this stuff on a scale for sure.
Don't take 7 grams. It's not a starter dose. It's not an intermediate dose.
Yeah, and also make sure, because you want to have a frame of reference, because it definitely there are different thresholds, and of course it's going to be different with different mushrooms, but it is important, because once you get up there, I've had overwhelming experiences that were not pleasant, and then I don't regret it, but just be aware that, once you get up into that territory, you want to work your way up, I think. It's, at least that's what I would recommend, because, at a certain point, it's awesome that you had that great experience. But I had, here's another tip. You want to be in good, I find actually the better physical shape that I'm in, the better I'm able to handle higher doses.
Oh, interesting. Yeah,
for sure. Because the places that I like to go to on high doses of mushroom require me to hold a physical space. And so this is going to be this is a more I think a more masculine way of interacting with the medicine or the experience. But I find that if I'm able to sort of hold energies in my body, it's a much better experience, because otherwise what would happen to me is that I will get to these places where I can sort of hold this energy. It's difficult to explain. I can hold these energetic containers in my body. It's like some sort of weird internal yoga thing. And this is where you get into some far out there places. And it really feels like you can do some very interesting things in terms of healing work and who knows, but the feeling when you you can't maintain that and it collapses, it's just wah wah wah. It's it just feels terrible. You're like, shit, I blew it. And then you have to build that energy back up again, and then I had experience like that on 5.5 grams, and then I did 6 grams the next time. And that's the thing, as I said, I could be a great teacher. If you don't get the lesson, you're going to get hammered. And one of the lessons I didn't get was don't take that many mushrooms in a tired state. So I was not in good shape, and it was later than I wanted it to be. Just the circumstances, it wasn't going to be easy for me to do it again soon. I really wanted to do it, and I did it, and too late, too tired, and it was an overwhelming experience. I was just fuck, it felt like I had been I was entered by these foreign entities, instead very uncomfortable. So it took me a while to process and interpret that, and get comfortable doing higher doses again. And then like getting in better shape made all the difference there.
I remember you telling me about that when that happened, that you had these entities visit you and you were like, I don't know what went on. And luckily you had some people there who were able to help. Was that the time you had help?
A friend, I was like, yo, bro, if you know any like banishing rituals, now's the time. Like, what the fuck? Yeah.
I've taken like a relatively regular dose, maybe somewhere around like 3 grams before. And I know what you mean about being tired, where like I'm an hour and a half in and I'm like, okay, I'm ready for this to be over. And that's definitely not how you want to feel on mushrooms. Because, you know, it's a solid 4-hour experience usually from start to finish.
Yeah.
And when you're just like, I would love for this to be over and it's not, then you're just like, not embracing, not learning. You're not going to take those lessons and integrate them.
Yeah, that's why I've always been I didn't do acid for a long time because this doesn't say, I'm not particularly drawn to acid, but the times I've done it recently, I haven't had the same issue. But like, for whatever reason, when I was a kid and I would do acid, like the first time I tried acid, I tried for 24 hours and I was like, what the fuck? I was like, is this ever going to be over? Like, fuck. So it was like a huge commitment. Like I really enjoyed it. But it was like, you know, it'd be like 18 hours if I was lucky. Mm-hmm. And like, I really wish I pitched a baseball game on acid. I threw a one-hitter. Like I had no control, but they couldn't hit me either. And we ended up winning 5. I got a hit. Like I couldn't believe it. But it was so insanely stressful because I had to think about every, you know, all those things that are just muscle memory, just the mechanics of of pitching. Like, you know, normally like you don't think about a damn thing. You just like, you know what pitch you're gonna throw and you just do it. But then like on acid, it's like, oh shit, is there a runner on? Should I be pitching from the stretch right now? Fuck. I'm like, wait, do I step back with my left foot or my right foot? Fuck. Okay, I think it's all right. Okay. And then it's just like, you're like, fuck. And it is, I do not recommend it. It's very stressful.
That's fair. I took acid once like a year ago. Really, for my first true time. And I just remember being like, when is this? I was like 6 hours in. I was like, I'm done. When do I get to be done? Can I ever be done? I guess not. I'm here forever.
Yeah.
So what, I know what integration means. I wonder if some of the people listening know what integration means and how would you describe integration?
Well, when you have a psychedelic experience, when you have learnings from it, it's coming from a different place, a different, level of consciousness. There's a process by which you integrate those lessons into normal life. And it can be really valuable. Because you don't want to have this like life-changing mushroom trip and then like have to go to work. And then I did ayahuasca one time with a friend of mine in it was a 2-night ceremony, and he was going to literally leave to perform surgery in between the two because I was like, bro. But it didn't end up happening.
Thank God.
Thankfully, like they were able to reschedule, but like, and that's not necessary. Like, well, actually, no. If you're doing a 2-day ayahuasca ceremony, like I feel like that, any ceremony like that, the day in between, there's definitely a lot of processing that happens, and also preparation and everything, and these things have a big difference, a big impact on how. On how how it changes and affects your life. So like with the unpleasant mushroom experience I had, where like it felt like I was like overwhelmed. Ketamine was tremendously helpful for me to, ketamine is. it's a dissociative that so now is being used clinically for therapeutic reasons, and it's something that can help you sort of detach and process and like look at experiences from all these different angles, where you can detach from the meaning that you put on different things, and it can help you kind of see things with a little bit more objectivity that can kind of bring peace. So that that can be really, really useful. But yeah, generally speaking, you want to give yourself some time to process, some solitude after a really wild and intense experience. For me, the most life-changing one was the first time I did ayahuasca, and it was like it took a minute. Like the post-processing for that was, that changed a lot of things for a minute. And it's still changed. It's changed everything since. So having that time to reflect on things and absorb them is important.
Yeah, I like that. In trying to figure out how to describe this as well, I've been researching integration, and now that I'm a psychedelic guide with my best friend Leah, we're holding mushroom ceremonies for people. A lot of what we do is help integrate afterwards. And for people who haven't experienced a plant medicine ceremony, or been exposed to the term integration, they're definitely like, what is that? What does that mean exactly? And it's like, well, if you sat down with your therapist and you had this mind-blowing understanding all of a sudden about your relationship with your mother, let's say, and you just got, the lid blown off of why you act this certain way in other relationships because of your mother, and now, you have to go think on that, you have to go heal on that. Like, that's kind of what happens in the medicine and the psilocybin and those things as well. Like, you'll look at something through a different lens that will completely shift the perspective of maybe your identity or maybe your story or the ways that you feel about things. And it takes time to like honor those, because it's almost, like we've said, doing 10 years of therapy in one session. And so if you have this mind-blowing realization, or maybe it's even stuck energy in your body that you get released, and now all of a sudden you're lighter and brighter, and you want to reflect on where that came from and why that happened, and understand, so that you're not taking it in the setting of, let's take mushrooms to party. Like, that should be a really outdated mindset. And I think that's the worst abuse of psilocybin mushrooms, for example, is taking them to party. Like, I love that people are taking mushrooms. I love it. Sometimes I take them to hang out, but I am the first person to walk away from a party and be like, whew, I'm having something going on. I'm going to go home and go be by myself. Yeah,
I think it's cool I have definitely enjoyed mushrooms as an enhancer for different experiences, but when you want to have a profound, life-changing experience, it's part of how you manifest the respect for the experience is by giving it the space and doing, and giving yourself the solitude to process it, because internally, if you're just flat out disrespecting the experience, and that if you're just like, if you go from that to just fucking off somehow for whatever reason, if you don't make it enough of a priority to create the space to have that processing before you go back in, and this is something, I've to admit that it's easy to say this, but it really is. The more the experienced I become, the more I think I recognize that it is worth it, no matter what kind of worldly concerns might seem important. If you're going to venture to go through one of these experiences, it is worth blocking off the time to properly digest and integrate it, and talk to people like you to help through that process.
Yeah. And so to reflect on a few of mine, like when I had that my spiritual awakening in 2016 on those mushrooms, and now all of a sudden, for the first time in a long time, my heart is just blasted wide open. I'm in love with myself for the first time in my entire life, which made me in love with everything around me. It took integration, because I went from the day before being like, I can't exist on this earth anymore. I don't love myself. I don't love anything except for my dog. Someone will take care of him. And now I'm in this elated state. Like, that took some time. It's like I had to move. I had to be in nature. I had to experience other things that helped kind of ground me in a sense, because my head was in the clouds just floating on this love. So sometimes that's the integration. Sometimes it's simpler, one time I decided I was going to blow the lid off I was going to really analyze my relationship with my dad. And for whatever reason, I just was bawling. As soon as I started to poke and prod at it, my body was like, nope, shut down, cry.
Yeah.
And I was messed up for at least 5 days after my ceremony. I would just spontaneously start crying throughout the day. As soon as I would think about my dad, I'd cry. And now I eventually had to kind of plug that one, and have since realized, like, my dad, that was more pent up emotions I had about my father as opposed to my relationship with my dad.
Yeah.
So the integration for me on that one took 8 or 9 months, because I just a couple months ago went and saw my dad again at a wedding, and had the true realization that I was trying to pick apart something that didn't need picking apart. My dad was actually a really good dad. And I feel really blessed to be able to say that, because throughout my life, people have always wanted to be like, well, he wasn't emotionally available always, and it's like,
it's such a mind fuck.
Right. Everyone's got their perspective. It's impossible to be
objective about it, and it's so important.
Yeah. And it's like, was he not emotionally available, or did I not give him the opportunities? Because the handful of opportunities I gave him in my lifetime, my dad showed the fuck up. And most people can't say that.
Yeah.
And I was like, I realized...
This is a whole other... Yeah.
Yeah. I realize now that that integration for me of poking at that took 8 or 9 months even.
Yeah.
And so sometimes different things come up, and they're worth spending the time with, at least having the next day to be able to honor your experience and do what feels right. Also, like with my first heroic dose of mushrooms, it was so mind expanding and like nothing I'd ever experienced before. I had to track down the owner of the retreat I was at, and I felt comfortable enough going to him and being like, hey, I know you have a no plant medicines policy, but I just took a heroic dose of mushrooms last night and I really need someone to talk to. So he was like, lots of people have actually taken mushrooms in that cabin. And I was like, what?
Well, too late now. So
he was like, well,
might as well talk about it.
Yeah, he's like, everyone's done it there. I was like, oh, okay, cool. And it was, sometimes it's just good to have someone else validate your experience, because it's so different and it's off the beaten path. You want to almost be like, did I make all that up?
You also have to explain it in a way that makes sense to another person, which is really internally helpful sometimes.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it's just like these, different impressions of different experiences and things that seem very abstract, at least from my experience sometimes. So like having to explain it to someone forces you to kind of weave it into something consciously. And I think there's even some creative decisions made in that process where you make it more palatable to your memory to go back and you kind of weave the story, because you have some agency to kind of choose what that experience meant to you. And having to explain it to someone else gives you an opportunity to do that and verbalize it. It's like solidifies it more.
Because mushrooms are notorious for letting you forget everything that happened if you didn't immediately turn around and tell someone about it.
Yeah.
You know, I do also find like I like to journal about it the next day and get out everything so that I can, okay, wait, now it's legit that I had that experience, and I can continue to relay that to help other people. Because otherwise things just start slipping, and then you take mushrooms again and you're like, oh wait, I remember last time that thing, I just got triggered about that thing that I totally forgot about.
Yeah, it's a lot happening, a lot of stimulation to the mind. Yeah. And sometimes there's just one scene that will happen where it's like it's a lot to explain. So yeah, so after it happens, like, it can definitely be useful. I mean, I'll admit I don't do this, but like I could definitely, I could definitely see, and other people, you know, have done this in my presence, and it makes less sense to me to journal what, you know, the experience is. I like to just kind of like review it kind of in my mind and kind of like cycle through it, but like one way or another, like reviewing it, definitely.
Yeah. And so I also want to honor you and what you're doing now, aside from, because this is not your business. This is just something we get along super well about. And so tell me about, you're using Myers-Briggs personality types to describe famous people, to describe musicians. What are you doing with Myers-Briggs?
Well, if people want to know what their Myers-Briggs type is, what their accurate Myers-Briggs type is, I do one-on-one sessions. So it's sort of like the next, like, Carl Jung is the one who came up with the theory of personality that Myers-Briggs is based on. And then tests were a great innovation by two amazing women, Catherine Cook Briggs and Isabel Briggs Myers, who you know, came up with this great innovation of this test in the 1940s, you know, which was a long time ago.
Yeah. Before I was born.
That was, you know, during World War II, when, you know, when a lot of men were fighting overseas and women were entering the job force, and there was a very, you know, part of very sincere intent behind this was to, and certainly coming from the Industrial Revolution, this is major progress. It was very important. You know, for them to be able to end up in jobs that they were suited for. You know, that was the intention of it. But tests are not a great way to sort of to figure out type. I mean, roughly as many as 50% of people who take even the official Myers-Briggs test end up with a different result the second time that they take it. And it's because static tests are problematic for a number of reasons. So I've been doing this professionally for about 10 years now. And if I wanted to help you get clarity on what your Myers-Briggs type was, like, I could write a test for you, but that wouldn't make a whole lot of sense if you think about it. It would be sort of like doing a video call. It's so much easier. It'd be like if I wanted to send a message to you in Morse code instead of just like sending you a text or like picking up the phone. So like in a live session, I can ask you open-ended questions. If you're not clear on what the question means or how to interpret it, you can ask for clarification. Because, you know, people are different in different circumstances. People change over time. So we can be very clear on what it is I'm asking, and then your response. If I'm not clear on your response, I can ask for clarification there. We can go down improvised paths. I can pick up on different clues like, you know, vocal tonality and things like that you could never get from a test. And this, you know, this is something that I was trained by pioneers of this, Cameron Huff and Antonia Dodge, about 10 years ago. I became completely obsessed with it. I've done this with hundreds of people. Like, I did this because for me, like, what this was like, I was, you know, I just felt like an outcast as a kid. Like, I was just like, I felt like disconnected from the people in my family. I was very different, different personality makeup from everyone I was surrounded with. So I felt very alien. And Myers-Briggs it was the framework that cracked that code for me, where I was like, oh, that's what's happening. And all of a sudden, all of like the family dynamics made sense to me. And I understood how to relate to people, and it changed everything. Like, I mean, family functions for me when I was a kid, like I would just would go off somewhere and like isolate myself. I didn't want to talk about the same things everybody wanted to talk about. And it was just like, there was just a lot of frustration there. So as soon as I figured this out, I was like, oh yeah. And like, so like I went all the way and just became obsessed with, I felt very strongly that Myers-Briggs it's something that it just has to do with your cognitive structure, and you can't divorce. There are clues all over the place, no matter how much a person would try to hide something or how polished they would be, even if they're a politician or whatever. You can read clues all over the place. So I just became obsessed with trying to be like omniscient with this sort of thing and like pick up people's types as quickly as possible. So I would do it as also like sort of like parlor trick in a bar and bars, and just like start up conversations. Like, I mean, I was very socially awkward, and this was really helpful for me to be able to kind of break out of my shell because it was a way that I could relate to people, and it was socially challenging to figure out how do I like interject this into a conversation with a stranger. But the reason why was so important to me that I just plowed through all this stuff, and it was just a lot of conversations started with like, I know this is weird, but like, whatever, and eventually, that's how you get good at that sort of thing, is that like either you can make someone's face light up because you were able to understand them oftentimes, like, and validate them in a way that like people haven't their whole lives, like that, which is just the greatest rush to me, because like that was something, for me that like I was craving, feeling that level of being understood. Right. And to be able to do that very efficiently for people was just the coolest thing in the world. And like when you do this enough times, like either a person's eyes light up and they're like, holy shit, or not. And that's when you figure out you're wrong, and you're like, shit, okay, wait, let's go back and figure it out. You just rinse, repeat until, and I was trained by some people who were awesome, and as far as doing this in a disciplined professional setting. And I just, whatever opportunity I could to do this stuff. I was the most annoying student ever, and most just in general, I just wouldn't shut the fuck up about it. But I love doing it because when I do these sessions, it's awesome to feel like, I get paid for it. I'm happy with what I get paid for it. And it's awesome, and I feel like I deliver more value than what it cost. And every time I'm just like, that was just dope. That was just awesome, It's so wonderful to have something that's as rewarding to you as what you're delivering. What's your personality type? I'm an INFJ. And what does that mean? The letters stand for introvert, intuitive, feeler, judger. So, I for introvert, they already use the I, so they go to N for intuitive. And INFJs are supposedly the most rare type. There are no stats that I trust on any of this stuff. But INFJs are like so what I would say is that we're deep thinkers, and we are sensitive to emotional tension. So being that we're like deep thinkers, we're not like, just about any INFJ can relate to like just traumatic, awkward stages as kids, because we're not able to express ourselves as quickly oftentimes as we want to. And we feel the pain of the awkwardness because we're super sensitive. It's like we have like a friend of mine put it this way, that it's like we have a nervous system on the outside of our skin. Oof. So this is why we're like highly motivated. Like a lot of people who come to me are INFJs because they're trying to figure out like, yo, what the hell is going on? Why is life so difficult?
Yeah.
And that's sort of why. But INFJs are a lot of people who are who can, a lot of INFJs turn to like the arts, for example, because there's that craving, a desire to be able to formulate satisfying expressions, whereas like other people will be much quicker in the moment. They'll be like better debaters. They'll be better at just being able to like, be like witty in the moment. We develop these things over time, but this is always like that painful period where we're not able to do that. But INFJs, because of that struggle with tension and disharmony, we tend to want to make people feel better because it directly affects us. So a lot of people who are leaders of movements and things, for example, INFJs. So like Martin Luther King Jr., for example, or Mahatma Gandhi, or Adolf Hitler.
Welcome to the club.
Not all necessarily nice people, but yeah, that's sort of the cognitive makeup. And so for me, my entire family, with very few exceptions, were all sensors. And sensors are more sort of the quote unquote normies. Sensors are they orient to what's literally in front of them, what they can verify, to what's observably real, whereas intuitives are going to be more interested in like what's possible, what's really going on, like what's happening behind the curtain, so that's where most people who are gonna, I think most modern hippies are probably intuitives. Sensors are more just kind of like they tend to be less restless, whereas we're like wrestling with everything all the time.
Yeah. Interesting. So that you are an INFJ?
Yeah.
You said? Okay. When I first took my first Myers-Briggs in college, I was an ENTJ.
Your test told you were an ENTJ.
My test told me I was an ENTJ, which they also call like the marshal, the drill sergeant.
Yeah.
And it was very accurate for who I was at the time, I felt.
Yeah.
Because I was very much like, how do people employ people who like, people should just have to show up all the time? Like, what do you mean they can't like come in sometimes because they have this, like it's their job, they have to come. Like I didn't understand. And I have since retaken it because I was like, man, I bet I don't identify with ENTJ anymore. ENTJ. And I got an ENFJ.
Yeah, that's what you are.
Yeah. So I'm not as up. I didn't write a 30-page paper on being an ENFJ, which I did on the first one. But what does that say about me?
Well, okay. So,
and my feelings
so you're like sort of like the extroverted version of my type. Now, there's another layer to this theory where, so like it's kind of obscured by the letters, which is a sort of generalization. This is a confusing thing. I'm not going to really get into it, but I'll say that like ENFJ and INFJ are very similar types. ENTJ and ENFJ, like there's some differences that would be that like you couldn't really flip from one to the other. It would be like having like a lobotomy, if that makes sense. So like ENTJs, for example.
So that's what I was.
So that's what the test said that you are.
Right.
So I would say the way that the version of the theory that I subscribe to is that type doesn't actually change. That we like within the context of our type we mature and we change. But like I'll give you an example. So the difference between like an ENTJ. So this is a question I might ask in the course of like a session. So it'd be, if you're learning a new discipline, like, let's say chess, for example, are you more likely to approach understanding and learning the game from a holistic perspective, where you understand what to do in any contingency and sort of how all the rules work, or you're going to figure out like, how do I beat this other person, and how do I just kind of like reverse engineer everything from that, even if you don't necessarily understand how it all works together. So an ENTJ is going to be their like bottom line effectiveness thinkers. So like, and whereas like an ENFJ, for example, both types can be very hardcore. Like definitely can be very hardcore.
Yeah.
Just being like extroverted judgers, like you want to control first and foremost, you want to control the outside world so that you can feel a sense of peace and freedom.
This is like me in surfing right now.
Yeah.
Learning surfing has been like, I have to learn. Sometimes my friends are like, you just need to go out and have fun. I was like, fuck fun. Fun. I'm here to learn shit. Like, and then I'm in a wave and I'm like, okay, I'm supposed to wind up this way and do that this way. And then I'm like, fuck, that thing didn't happen. Okay, that was a lesson learned. Okay, clock that. Go back. We're gonna try again. Yes, like ENFJs are tend to be very mature in the realm of interpersonal dynamics, and can be can definitely be very take charge and very in control and hardcore, but it's done with a certain level of sort of a sophisticated, well-developed understanding of how this may affect other people's emotional needs and the needs in general. Was like ENT, so like a bigger picture idea. Yeah.
Well, I would say not necessarily maybe a bigger picture, but more just aware of the needs of the other people. Whereas like ENTJs are more likely to be like like a Steve Jobs type, where it's like this is the thing that needs to get done. Like they will struggle with empathy, so like they will struggle to understand how sometimes like a person can't fit into this like perfectly executed plan that doesn't account for their emotional needs.
Right. Which ironically is how I was when I was 18.
Yeah.
I was like, people don't have emotions when they show up to work. There should be no emotions at work. And now that I'm 36, I was actually literally like that. Like, people should not have emotions around work. It's just work. Remove your emotions.
Yeah.
So to me, I do truly feel like
Where did you learn that?
I don't know. I mean, I grew up being like editor-in-chief of the yearbook staff, and like, I don't know if it's probably from my family,
Yeah, I was going to say, it just sounds like it's going to like some kind of amateur
I haven't really digressed.
I
haven't dissected it so much, but I did at some point in my late 20s start to learn, people work at jobs. Jobs are not just like bots working with no emotions. They're actual human beings.
Yeah.
I think once I started to get into the entertainment industry and work as a PA and executive producer and realize I had feelings and emotions that affected my ability to work. And so other people perhaps also do the same. And that then if you honor those people and their emotions, that you can actually get better work out of people instead of just like forcing them to show up and have no emotions. And through that understanding paired with the empathy I actually had for people outside of work, helped me realize more of, you should give people leeway for things that they're going through. And that was not something that inherently came to me when I was younger.
Would you feel a sensitivity to if you're in a room with a group of people and somebody is like masking some kind of emotion that's troubling them, like how likely are you to pick up on that?
Pretty likely. And then I get to make the conscious choice of, do I want to participate in their dissecting of that and help them heal from it, or do I not have the bandwidth to deal with that right now?
Yeah. It's so ENFJs tend to be drawn to more often drawn to healing work.
That's what I do. So
ENTJs will often be very entrepreneurial, and I mean both can be very entrepreneurial, but ENTJs will tend to want to save the world, if that's what they aspire to do, through using basically technical and sort of logical means to do that, whereas like
Elon Musk.
Yeah, Elon Musk is an INTJ, so very similar circuitry.
Yeah,
basically.
he would be introverted.
Yeah, whereas like an ENFJ is going to be more directly to like, what do you need? How can we heal you? How can we, do this on a, scale this on a bigger, to a bigger audience.
Which is that's definitely much more where I find myself now. Like, how can I help you personally in this moment?
Right.
And then how can we help the world together?
So yeah, INFJs and ENFJs are wired very similarly in that regard. Yeah.
Cool. Very cool. And so if someone wants to do a Myers-Briggs test analysis with you, how can they do that?
I think go to whattype.com/mytype.
And that's WHATTYPE.com/mytype.
That's it.
Awesome. And how can everyone stay up with you? Are you on social media? I know I follow you. Do you want people to follow you?
Sure. Come on down. I'm on Instagram. I am Scott James, SCOTTJAMES. And that's kind of the only really platform that I'm active on right now.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for being my first podcast guest.
Yeah.
I'm so excited to talk about all of this with you and share it with the world. And I'm sure we'll circle back again because I'll have more questions.
All right. Yeah. It's been fun. Yeah, it's been an honor to be the first guest. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and review this podcast wherever you're listening. I'm so grateful to have you on this journey with me. Until next time.